Plato's Republic is one of those books that everyone talks about. It's a foundational text of Western civilization. But here's the wild part. It argues that our most cherished values, democracy, equality, liberty, are basically poisons. Poisons that corrupt not just our society, but our very souls. That's Plato's dangerous idea. So how on earth did one of the greatest minds in history end up so completely against everything we think we stand for? And this quote, man, it gets right to the heart of Plato's issue. For him, what we call being fair or non-discriminating isn't a virtue at all. It's a huge mistake. It's a failure to see a really hard truth, that some ways of living, some values, and yeah, some people are just plain better than others. It's a shocking thought, for sure. So let's really dig into why he believed this. So this is the big question we're tackling, right? How did a guy so obsessed with justice and living a good life come to see freedom itself as the enemy? Well, the answer lies in one of his most powerful ideas, a single metaphor that is the key to unlocking his entire political philosophy. This right here is the key to everything. Seriously, Plato believed that a city is just the soul of its citizens, written in giant letters for everyone to see. A chaotic city means chaotic souls. A society obsessed with money is just a reflection of souls consumed by greed. Once you get this city-soul analogy, his whole critique of our world just clicks. Okay, so think of this table as our roadmap for this entire explainer. We're going to follow Plato's argument step by step. First, we'll look at his diagnosis of the democratic soul. Then we'll trace its inevitable decay into tyranny. And finally, we'll see his ideal solution, a society ruled not by the rich or the powerful, but by pure reason. Let's start with the one we all know and, well, mostly love, democracy. But a quick heads up. When Plato talks about democracy, he's not really talking about voting or elections. For him, democracy is a state of mind. It's a cultural vibe, and he thinks it's a disease. Plato paints this picture of a society where all authority has just dissolved. Kids don't listen to their parents, students openly mock their teachers, and any kind of rule is seen as oppression. Everyone becomes so obsessed with their own personal freedom that they refuse to be guided by anything or anyone. The result isn't real freedom, it's just pure chaos, where every impulse gets to be king for a day. And this is where we really hit a wall with Plato. The things we hold up as virtues, he sees as symptoms of a society in decay. What we call freedom, he calls anarchy. What we call tolerance, he calls being lazy and indulging bad behavior just as much as good behavior. And what we call equality, he calls disorder, a flat-out refusal to admit that some things are better than others. So what about the person living in this democratic city? What's their soul like? Well, Plato says this person is absolutely convinced they are living the dream. They call their life one of pleasure, freedom, and happiness. They feel totally fulfilled. But from where Plato is standing, they are dead wrong. Plato basically describes someone who is completely adrift. One scholar calls this person a free-loving hippie, and honestly, that's not far off. They're ruled by whatever whim hits them. One day, they're all about hitting the gym. The next, it's all about partying. They'll dabble in philosophy, then jump into business, then try their hand at politics, but they never commit to anything. There's just no order, no real purpose, just a chaotic shuffle of desires, where the urge to seek wisdom is treated the same as the urge to grab a beer. So what's the big problem with this? Well, according to Plato, by treating every desire as equal, democracy completely loses the ability to tell the difference between good things and bad things. A modern example makes this crystal clear. There was an ad on the New York subway that told people, don't be ashamed you're using heroin, be proud you're using it cleanly. For Plato, that is the perfect example of the democratic mistake. It just flattens everything and refuses to say, no, hold on, some things should be shameful. So if this is the path we're on, where does it end? For Plato, the destination is both terrifying and, in his mind, completely inevitable. A society that values freedom above all else is not going to stay free for long. It's doomed to collapse into its total opposite. And this leads us to one of the most famous and, frankly, chilling lines in the entire Republic. Plato had this idea that any excess creates a violent swing in the other direction. Too much partying leads to a hangover. And, he argues, too much freedom leads only to slavery. So, how does this actually happen? Well, picture this. The people become terrified by the growing chaos. They start looking around for a strong leader, a champion who promises he can protect their stuff and bring back some order. But in their desperation, they hand him so much power that he becomes a tyrant, and the very same people who once loved freedom above all else end up as his slaves. So what's going on inside the mind of this tyrant? Plato's answer is brilliant and actually pretty modern. He says the tyrant's soul is just like an addict's. It's a person who's been completely taken over by one single overpowering desire. Think of lust or greed or a craving for power. That one desire becomes the tyrant of the soul, and it enslaves everything else just to serve it. The person's entire life revolves around feeding that one destructive impulse. And this is where Plato delivers this just incredible twist. The tyrant looks like the most powerful person in the world, totally free to do whatever he wants. But in reality, he is the most enslaved person of all. He's like an addict with an infinite supply, completely trapped by his own cravings. His soul is a wasteland ruled by its absolute worst part, which makes him not the happiest, but the most miserable person imaginable. All right, so we've hit rock bottom. We've gone from the chaos of democracy all the way down to the slavery of tyranny. But Plato doesn't just leave us in the dark. Now we start the climb back up as we explore his solution, the ideal state, which he called Kallipolis, the beautiful city. Now, before he can build his perfect city, Plato says we first have to understand the blueprint of the human soul. And he argued that every single one of us has these three parts, kind of battling it out inside. There's reason, which is the part that wants truth. There's spirit, which craves honor and respect. And then there's appetite, which is all our primal drives for food, money, and, physical satisfaction. And here's where that city-soul analogy comes roaring back. Plato designs his ideal city to be a perfect, large-scale mirror of a healthy soul. The philosopher kings, who represent reason, are in charge. The guardians, who are the soldiers, represent spirit, and they protect the city. And the producers, the farmers and the craftsmen, they represent appetite, and they provide all the material stuff the city needs. So for Plato, justice is actually pretty simple. It's all about putting the right part in charge. In a healthy person and a healthy city, reason has to be the boss. But here's the thing. Reason is kind of weak on its own. It needs muscle. So it makes an alliance with spirit, our sense of honor and shame, to keep the powerful and wild appetites in line. Spirit is like a well-trained guard dog, totally loyal to its master, reason, but fierce when it needs to be. Okay, wow, we have been on quite a journey, right? We've gone from democracy all the way down to tyranny and climbed all the way back up to Plato's ideal. So let's put it all together and see what this ancient way of thinking might have to say about our world today. So this is it. This is Plato's whole theory of political decay all in one place. He says it all starts with the perfect state, the aristocracy, ruled by reason. But over time, it falls apart. It becomes a timocracy, which is all about military honor. That then decays into an oligarchy, ruled by the super rich. This obsession with money eventually collapses into the radical anything-goes freedom of democracy, which, as we've seen, spirals down into the addiction and slavery of tyranny. And that brings us right back to where we started, to Plato's dangerous idea. If he's right, if our society really is just a giant mirror of our collective soul, then we have to ask ourselves a pretty tough question. What does our world, with all its chaotic freedoms, its deep divisions, and its never-ending appetites, what does it all really say about the state of our own souls?